Welcome back to my channel for part 2 of my Pick Your Poison series. If you haven't watched part 1, where I go over arsenic, cyanide, thallium, and strychnine, I would love for you to go watch that one. Personally, I think it's my best one yet. But without further ado, hi, my name is Shelby, and this is Merrily Morbid, the channel where we explore all things that are at least a little bit dark. From deadly diseases to natural disasters, from true crime to man-made catastrophes. Today, we're going to be looking at Wolfsbane, deadly nightshade, Mercury, and antifreeze. So if that's your kind of thing, come along and let's get morbid. All right, today we begin with Wolfsbane. It's actually just one in a genus of over 250 species, and it goes by many names: aconite, monkshood, leopard's bane, devil's helmet, blue rocket, among others. It has a long history and is very important, particularly for Greek mythology. It also has ties in with werewolf lore. Some legends say that Wolfsbane was capable of turning a person into a werewolf, whereas other legends say that Wolfsbane was the cure to lycanthropy, or being a werewolf. In the real world, it's been used historically as a poison against wolves, hence the name. Once upon a time, wolves were a common pest. To protect themselves and their livestock, people would use raw meat as bait, and they would slip in a little wolfsbane to take care of the wolf problem. But wolfsbane isn't just deadly to wolves, it's quite deadly to humans, and has been called Queen of the Poisons, although there's another queen we'll talk about later. Wolfsbane is actually very pretty. It's a very pretty flower that's found in the wild in the Northern Hemisphere, North America, Europe, and Asia. It is found primarily in cool and moist regions, and it particularly likes wet meadows and the banks of streams. It's also found in many home gardens because, in spite of its lethality, it's a pretty flower. It wasn't always kept in gardens for that reason, though. Historically, wolfsbane has been used as a medicinal herb, as the alkaloids in wolfsbane can relieve pain, reduce fever, and even strengthen a weak heartbeat. But that's only in very strictly controlled amounts. In fact, it really shouldn't be used as a medicine without direct supervision of a doctor, because the amount that it takes to kill is pretty minimal. Most deaths from wolfsbane are actually from people who try to use it as a medicine and overdose. But it's not unheard of for hikers and foragers to mistake wolfsbane for other edible plants, and only after they've eaten it, they learn the terrible truth. After ingesting wolfsbane, symptoms can begin within minutes to hours and can include the following: abdominal pain, chest pain, diarrhea, dizziness, heart rhythm changes, nausea, numbness, shortness of breath, tingling, vomiting, and weakness. Heart arrhythmia and respiratory failure are usually the causes of death in people with wolfsbane poisoning. And you should also know that all parts of the plant are poisonous. Poisoning can, of course, happen with ingestion, but wolfsbane poison can also be directly absorbed through the skin. So please, for the love of God, if you've ever come upon it in the woods, do not touch it. The plant has many different chemicals that are toxic to animals, and the main one to know about is aconitine. It works by blocking sodium channels within the nerves and muscles. In short, the diaphragm stops working, leaving the lungs motionless, and the heart stops beating. Say a person shows up to the hospital and is suffering from some unknown illness. Officially, diagnosis is done through observing symptoms and knowing that a person has been out in nature or has been near wolfsbane. There are no antidotes for wolfsbane poisoning, but there are a few things that can be done for its victims. Activated charcoal can be given to those who have eaten the plant. Medications can be given to help irregular heartbeat and seizures, and a respirator can help if the lungs begin to fail. But that's about the extent of it. You really just support them until the wolfsbane has passed through the body. Now, the lethal amount of wolfsbane is only between 1 and 5 milligrams. To put that in perspective, a single grain of rice weighs between 20 and 30 milligrams, so it pretty much takes nothing to be fatal. Without medical intervention, it is fatal, 100%. But luckily with medical intervention, the mortality rate's a surprising 5.5%. Most of the time, wolfsbane is a lone wolf and takes out a single victim at a time. But through history, there have been a few mass poisoning cases. One that popped up during my research was of an unsolved mass poisoning of 8 patients in 1883 at Western State Lunatic Asylum in Virginia. One morning in February, 8 patients were given their morning liquid medication, all of whom became sick. Of those 8 patients, 7 lost consciousness, with 4 of them dying immediately. 2 more died over the next few days, with only 1 regaining consciousness and surviving. Investigations have pointed to someone having snuck into the medicine cabinet during the previous night and mixing in what is believed to have been aconitine, which was one of the deadly compounds extracted from wolfsbane. The superintendent believed that the poisonings were done by political extremists who wanted him ousted, but it remains unsolved to this day. I just want to jump in here and remind you to subscribe and like this video. It only takes a second, but really helps out my channel in the algorithm. Thanks. Let's get back into it. Now, may I introduce you to Her Royal Majesty, Deadly Nightshade, Queen of the Poisons. Nightshade, as I will call it, has been a staple through history, whether for taking out your enemies or making yourself a little prettier. It's a versatile plant. Today, we use a medication derived from nightshade called atropine to control saliva during surgery and to dilate a person's pupils during eye exams. Women in Renaissance Italy used it to dilate their pupils, and they did it for the beauty of large eyes. And in that time, they called it belladonna. Aconitine has also been used to treat insecticide and mushroom poisoning. And it can be used to treat slow heart rates during emergencies. Nightshade's also used to make a medication called scopolamine, which is used to treat nausea and vomiting. But don't be fooled. Nightshade doesn't lie. Its name is Deadly Nightshade for a reason. All parts of the plants can kill you, but especially the unripe fruit and leaves. Nightshade grows widely throughout Europe, North Africa, and Asia Minor. Now listen up. Although deadly nightshade poisoning is rare today, when it does happen, it's generally accidental. So if you think what you are seeing are wild blueberries in a shady clearing out in the woods, do not eat them. It will not be pleasant for you if you do. But if my words are not enough to dissuade you, you can expect the following: dry mouth, dilated pupils, diarrhea, stomach pain, vomiting, low blood pressure, heart rate slowing, slowed breathing, delirium, and hallucinations, headache, loss of sensation, paralysis, and hyperthermia. So good luck with all that. There is no antidote, and treatments are just supportive. Now, there is a bit of good news. As long as you don't die before you reach the hospital, you should survive. So again, don't go playing forager if you don't know what the hell you're doing. One last fun fact about nightshade before we move on. Did you know that in spite of how dangerous nightshade is to many species, it is actually vital to the ecosystem, and that bees and butterflies and various species of bird actually rely on nightshade for food and nectar? And also, For some strange reason, rabbits and cows are immune to it. So that's different. Of the poisons in this video, one of two that you are most likely to come in contact with is mercury. It's in light bulbs, thermometers, and a safe for human form is found in many life-saving vaccines. But there are many forms that are not safe for humans. And of course, that's the kind we like to focus on this channel. I would like to think that we all remember what we learned in high school about elements, but who's kidding who? I don't remember crap from high school chemistry, except that pure sodium and water don't mix. Anyway, so here's a rundown. Mercury is extracted from rock or ore. The ore is crushed and then ground into a powder. Then it's put into a furnace where the lower melting temperature of mercury allows it to separate from the ore and evaporate. The evaporated mercury is then condensed, and then you get liquid mercury, the mercury we're used to seeing. The ore generally used for the process is called cinnabar, which was actually very popular with the ancient Chinese for carvings. Now, for the part that you already know, unless you've been living under a rock, pun intended, mercury is poisonous. I know that, you know that, but do you know how most mercury poisoning cases happen these days? Seafood. It can happen from eating too much seafood or eating specific fish that contain higher amounts of mercury. Those include shark, swordfish, big-eye tuna, marlin, tilefish, and king mackerel. But poisoning can also come from environmental exposure, broken mercury thermometers, some jewelry, amalgam dental fillings, and adulterated skin products. Black market skin cream isn't worth it, because when mercury gets into the body, it can't get rid of it again. It gets trapped in the organs and wreaks havoc. Adults with mercury poisoning can experience long-term complications like permanent brain damage and kidney damage. Fetuses, infants, and young children exposed to high levels of mercury may have cognitive delays, issues with fine motor skills, and delays with speech and language, and also problems with visual spatial awareness. In adults, lower levels of mercury can cause anxiety, depression, irritability, issues with memory, numbness of the feet, hands, and mouth, or tremors. Mercury builds up in the body over time and can lead to more severe problems, which can include hearing and speech difficulties, muscle weakness, lack of coordination, and having trouble walking, nerve loss in the hands and face, and vision changes. If not addressed, all this damage can kill. Respiratory failure, kidney failure, brain damage. Interestingly, though, mercury poisoning can actually be seen on a chest x-ray, where it looks a lot like bright static. Urine tests and blood tests can also be done to show not only the presence of mercury, but also the concentration. And even though there are no antidotes, there are treatments that can be done. Activated charcoal can be given, whole bowel irrigation, dialysis, and transfusions. For acute poisoning, chelation therapy can be done, where IV medication containing binding agents is given, which allows the body to then get rid of the mercury through the urine. Early intervention can stop mercury poisoning, but it's important to know that most of the time, any neurological symptoms that a person experiences are going to be permanent. Thankfully, in the US, death is exceedingly rare. The most recent year with available statistics for mercury poisoning is 2022, which shows over 1,000 exposures, but 0 deaths. We are aware today of the true danger of mercury, but that wasn't always true. There is a condition called erethism, or erythemus mercurialis. You may have heard it called the Mad Hatter disease. From the 1700s into the 1900s, hat makers used to use mercury to stiffen felt hats. What they didn't know was how toxic it is. They didn't exactly take precautions like working in ventilated areas. This was pre-OSHA. Hatters were well known for their eccentric behavior, and by 1837, the phrase mad as a hatter was common. If you haven't put two and two together yet, I'll help you out. Mad as a hatter, as in the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland, it gives you a little bit of a mental picture of how a person with advanced mercury poisoning may actually behave. But not all forms of mercury are toxic over time. Some can kill in a second. Karen Wetterhahn was an esteemed professor at Dartmouth College when she was working in the summer of 1996. She was working on understanding the effects of heavy metals on living things when a seemingly insignificant accident happened. It was mid-August when she was working in the lab with dimethylmercury. She knew that the chemical was very dangerous, so she took all these standard precautions: a fume hood, face shield, double latex gloves. In a split second, she accidentally got a drop, maybe two, on her gloves on her hand. She immediately stopped what she was doing, performed the decontamination protocol, and moved on with her day. She had no idea, nor could anyone at the time, know how bad that accident had been. She didn't know that the drop of mercury had penetrated through the gloves instantly. It wasn't until months later that the terrible truth surfaced. January 1997, 5 months after the incident, Wetterhahn knew that something was wrong. She was struggling with her balance, speech, vision, and her hearing. By the end of January, she was hospitalized where they did blood work. The blood work revealed something unbelievable. Her blood contained a level of mercury that was 80 times higher than what it needed to be toxic. It was 3 weeks after that she slipped into a coma, and she remained in that coma until she ultimately passed away June 8th, 1997, 10 months after the tragic incident. Now, we come to our final substance on this list, ethylene glycol. Chances are that you're around it a lot because this stuff is found everywhere, from ballpoint pens to cosmetics, from the prep solution used in colonoscopies, yum, to the antifreeze in your cars. Now, Paracelsus, a physician and alchemist, once said, "The dose makes the poison." And unfortunately, does it make a great poison? More than 5,000 cases of antifreeze poisoning occur each year in the US alone. In 2022, 6,079 exposures were reported to poison control. 5,248 of those were accidental. 442 of those cases resulted in moderate to severe injury, and 8 people died. Unfortunately, ethylene glycol is naturally sweet, which can be attractive to animals and children. With animals, they are usually poisoned when they lick up spilled antifreeze. Sadly, it isn't unheard of as a method of self-elimination. The crazy thing is that most poisonings actually occur in adults, and just 4 fluid ounces are enough to kill a grown man. That's half a cup. To put it further in perspective, it looks like this. Antifreeze isn't actually toxic until the body begins to break it down in the liver. With each step, it becomes more and more toxic. But within hours, not so fun symptoms begin, and they can include nausea, vomiting, convulsions, and delirium. If the poisoning is significant enough, there can be brain, lung, liver, and kidney damage. A person can go into shock or organ failure. They can end up in a coma. And of course, death is always on the table when dealing with poisons. Ethylene glycol poisoning can be diagnosed through blood and urine tests and sometimes other kinds of tests. And there are actually 2 antidotes, but one might surprise you. Now, the first is a medication called fomepizole. The second, and this is not a joke, is alcohol. I read about one patient who was given whiskey through a nasogastric tube, which is the tube that goes down your nose through the esophagus into the stomach. Turns out that the enzyme that breaks down ethylene glycol is also the one that breaks down alcohol. And lucky for us, because it beats out the ethylene glycol, so the body's too busy metabolizing the alcohol to even get to work on the ethylene glycol. Now, at that point, it can just be excreted through the urine. How wild is that, though? You show up with your ethylene glycol poisoning, so your doctor has to make a liquor store run. But just because I told you that does not mean that you should try it for yourself. Promise me, no antifreeze cocktails with whiskey chasers, because the damage can be permanent. And the organs that suffer the most are the kidneys and the brain. And one of those cannot be fixed with a transplant. The death rate ranges from 1 to 22% and depends on how much ethylene glycol was ingested and how long it took the person to get medical attention. Now, perhaps the most famous case of antifreeze poisoning is that of the Stout family. The family was made up of Diane, Mark, and their 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters. The tragedies began in April 2012 when Mark Stout suddenly died following a short illness. With the money from the life insurance payout, Diane bought her and her children a new house in a nicer neighborhood, and there they just tried to move on with their lives. Just 5 months later, their oldest child, Sean, who was 26 and had autism and epilepsy, died suddenly, again, following a short illness. Now, neither Mark nor Sean were the healthiest people, so there wasn't much suspicion. Yet, someone made an anonymous report that claimed that Diane had been responsible for her son's death. But since his death had already been ruled as natural, it was case closed, at least for a little bit. 10 months later, yet another tragedy would rock the Stout family. The oldest daughter, Sarah, ended up in the hospital with unexplained kidney failure and bleeding in the brain. The family's pastor called in an anonymous tip, later discovered, which accused Diane of killing her husband and son, and said that she was responsible for her daughter's hospitalization. 9 days after the tip was called in, Diane was brought in for further questioning. Although she denied it at first, she eventually did confess to poisoning her family with antifreeze. She had put it in each of their drinks. She told the investigators that she hated her husband and she saw her son as a burden. She poisoned her older daughter because she was living at home, 24, and didn't have a job. She was a bum in her mother's eyes. At this point, the house was searched for evidence, and that's when a real bombshell was dropped. Turns out that the 22-year-old daughter, Rachel, had helped her mother plan her father's murder. Although she didn't approve or agree with poisoning her brother or sister, she kept quiet. She even confessed that her youngest sister, who was only 11 at the time, would have been their next victim. Sarah survived her poisoning but sustained brain damage and now lives in an assisted living facility. The youngest child, who is a child, ended up in foster care. Rachel Stout, the sister, took a plea and got 2 life sentences with a chance of parole after 42 and a half years. Diane took an Alford plea, which acknowledges that the evidence is overwhelming, but doesn't require her to actually admit to her crimes. Disgusting. Anyway, she was sentenced to 3 life sentences with no chance of parole. To this day, she has never accepted responsibility for killing her husband and her son, attempting to kill her oldest daughter, and for plotting to kill her youngest. And that's it for today. If you like this video and want to see more morbid topics from me, like this video, subscribe to my channel, comment below. Every subscriber and like helps this channel grow. And if you aren't sick of me yet, check out my binge playlist. And as always, don't forget to be merry, but stay morbid.